It was a dusty late afternoon in Wyoming Territory, 1887. The sun hung low, casting long streaks of copper light across the endless plain. The train station sat forgotten at the edge of the prairie, paint peeled from its walls, windows coated in grime that no one bothered to clean. The tracks stretched into forever, rusted and warped by heat and time, the whistle of a train nothing but a memory here. On the splintered platform she sat, the abandoned mail-order bride. A woman who had traveled farther than she ever imagined, only to be left behind. Her dress was once a soft blue, now dulled and stiff with dust. The hem torn, the bodice wrinkled from sleepless nights. She sat on a crate marked sugar, that hadn't held sugar in years. The bonnet slipped back on her head, revealing hair damp with sweat and tangled by the wind. She clenched the small reticule in her lap as if it could anchor her to something solid. But there was nothing solid. Just the wind, the empty station, and the terrible truth that no one was coming. Or so she thought. In the distance, beyond the shimmering heat, a rider moved along the ridge. A single figure on horseback outlined against the setting sun. She couldn't see him yet. But he saw her, a woman alone at the world's end. And as he nudged his horse down the trail, his purpose was clear. The cowboy was coming for her. The rider was lean in the saddle, shoulders squared beneath a faded canvas coat, the brim of his hat low against the setting sun. His horse, a bay with a scar on its flank, moved steady beneath him, unhurried as if both beast and man understood that rushing through life solved nothing. Dust rose around their legs, carried by the restless wind that swept down from the ridge. He had spotted her from up there, a lone figure on the platform, still as stone, small against the wide prairie. From that distance he hadn't seen her face, but he didn't need to. He recognized the weight in her posture, the quiet desperation in the way she clutched the bag in her lap. A woman abandoned. He'd seen it before. He reined in the horse at the edge of the station yard, boots creaking in the stirrups. The place was as dead as the tracks that bordered it, grass grown up between the rails, station door half hanging off its hinges. The sign that once read Cottonwood Station had lost most of its paint to sun and storm. The woman didn't look up. Not yet. He stayed seated, watching, measuring the moment. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and he saw it catch the light, burnished like old gold. There was a grace about her, even now. A strength that made something in his chest shift, unexpected and uninvited. He nudged the horse forward, the soft thud of hooves on hard earth the only sound. When he was near enough, he swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the dirt with a quiet finality. He left his horse ground-tied, took off his hat and walked slow, careful not to startle her. "Ma'am?" His voice was low, steady, carrying over the space between them. She startled just a little, then looked up, eyes wide, rimmed with red from holding back tears that wanted to fall. "Don't mean to alarm you," he said. "Just figured you might want some company before the night sets in." The sun dropped lower, the first stars appearing in the east. And for the first time in hours, the woman felt something other than fear. Hope, fragile but real, stirred beneath her ribs. She didn't speak right away. For a breath, she only stared at him as if trying to decide whether he was real or a mirage conjured by the heat and her own hopelessness. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and old wood, and in the distance, a coyote's cry echoed, thin and lonely. He kept his distance, respectful, his hat still in his hands, fingers brushing the worn band as if for luck. The horse snorted behind him, shifting its weight, but he didn't look away from her. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked again, softer now. Her throat worked before she found her voice. The word fell apart as quickly as it formed. She took a breath, tried again. "I don't know." He nodded once, slow. "You waitin' for someone?" Her eyes flicked down the track where no train would come. "I was." The words were heavy with the kind of heartbreak that comes not with a scream, but with silence. He let the quiet stretch between them, giving her room. Then he shifted his stance, glancing at the crate she sat on, the worn bag clutched in her lap, the frayed edge of her dress. "I don't reckon anyone ought to be out here alone come dark. Not with the coyotes runnin' bold and the cold settin' in." She looked at him then, really looked. Saw the wear of miles in the lines on his face, the sunburn at his collar, the way he stood solid, as if he'd hold the world steady if he could. "I don't know your name," she said, voice small but steadying. "Call me Luke." He offered a faint, easy smile. "Luke Harper." She hesitated. "Clara." "Clara Mayfield." Luke nodded like he'd been expecting no less. "Miss Mayfield, I'm not here to cause trouble. But if you'll let me, I'd be glad to see you somewhere safe." Her fingers tightened on the bag, knuckles pale. She thought of saying no, thought of staying put because staying felt safer than trusting a stranger. But the station's emptiness, the deepening cold, and the kindness in his voice all whispered otherwise. Finally she stood, unsteady at first, then straighter. "All right," she said. Luke stepped back, giving her space to gather herself. And as the last of the daylight faded, they turned together toward his horse, two strangers bound by chance and the long road ahead. Luke led the horse closer, careful not to rush her. The animal's breath steamed faint in the cooling air, the leather of the bridle creaking softly. Clara kept one hand on her bag, the other brushing at her skirt as if that might smooth away the dust of disappointment that clung to her. "Easy does it," Luke said, voice gentle. "He's a good horse. Won't give you trouble." Clara looked at the saddle, then at the distance beyond, empty prairie stretching wide, shadows gathering at the edges. Where would we go?" "There's a cabin about an hour's ride south," Luke said. "My. Got a roof, a fire, coffee if you're partial. You'd be welcome to it." She bit her lip, heart thudding hard. The station felt safe in its stillness, but that safety was a lie and she knew it. Night would bring cold and maybe worse. Yet the idea of going with a man she'd met only minutes before. "I don't want to be trouble," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Luke shook his head. "It ain't trouble, ma'am. I wouldn't have stopped if it was." The sincerity in his voice, the steady look in his eyes, chipped away at the fear that had built up since she stepped off that last train. She glanced toward the horizon, where the sun's last light bled into blue. "If I come with you, just for tonight," she said. Luke nodded, respectful. "Just for tonight. I'll see you safe." He helped her up, his hands warm and sure, not lingering longer than needed. Once she was settled, he swung into the saddle behind, leaving space so she wouldn't feel crowded. They set off at a steady pace, hooves striking sparks from the dry stones, the station shrinking behind them until it was just another shadow swallowed by the night. And as the stars began to prick the sky, Clara felt the tight knot of fear ease just a little. The horse moved at an easy gait, hooves soft against the hard-packed earth, the only sound in a world that had gone quiet with nightfall. Luke kept the reins loose, letting the animal find its way, while his eyes shifted between the darkening trail and the woman who now rode with him. Clara sat stiff at first, hands clenched tight in the folds of her skirt, heart pounding with every step that took her farther from the station. The station had been empty and cold, but it had been familiar for those long hours of waiting. This was unknown. But as the miles stretched behind them, something in her began to ease. The prairie opened wide around them, stars blossoming above in a sky so clear it seemed endless. The wind cooled, carrying the scent of dry grass, pine, and the faint sweetness of wild sage. Luke pointed ahead, his voice low so as not to startle the night. "You see that break in the ridge? My place sits just beyond it. Not much, but it's shelter." Clara followed the line of his hand, saw the dark slash of the ridge against the starlit sky, the promise of somewhere real to stop and breathe. "Thank you," she said, the words small but sincere. Luke didn't reply right away. He just tipped his hat back a fraction and gave a slight nod as if to say there's no need, but I hear you. The trail narrowed as they reached the rise, the horse sure-footed over the rocky ground. Below, in the shallow valley beyond, the faint outline of a cabin took shape, a squat shadow among the trees, with a curl of smoke rising from its chimney, left from the morning's fire. Clara felt her throat tighten. A roof. A fire. A place where she might, if only for a night, stop being the woman left behind and simply rest. Luke guided the horse down the slope, his presence steady beside her. The night wrapped around them, and for the first time in days, Clara felt the cold less sharply. The cabin was plain but sturdy, with walls weathered by the seasons and a porch that creaked underfoot. Luke swung down first, then offered his hand to Clara. She hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his, letting him steady her as she slid from the saddle. Her boots hit the ground with a soft thud, and for a moment she stood there, unsure of what came next. Luke led the horse to the small corral, working by lantern light, while Clara stood at the edge of the porch, arms wrapped around herself. The stars spilled across the sky like frost, and the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the clean, sharp scent of the night. When he returned, she was still there. "Come inside," he said gently. "It's warmer." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine. A fire crackled low in the hearth, throwing soft light across a table, a pair of chairs, a small bed tucked into the corner. Clara stepped in slowly as if afraid to disturb the peace of the place. "Sit," Luke said, setting a battered tin pot on the stove. "I'll make coffee." She sat, hands folded tight in her lap. For a while they said nothing. Just the sounds of the fire and the soft clatter of tin filled the room. Then Clara spoke, voice quiet, words spilling like water through a crack in a dam. I came west thinking I'd find a life worth having. Instead, I found empty promises. Luke poured the coffee, set a cup in front of her. Some men ain't worth the ink it takes to write their word. She gave a small, bitter laugh. He said he wanted a wife. What he wanted was a servant. Luke pulled out the other chair, sat across from her. You ran. She nodded, eyes fixed on the cup in her hands. And I kept running. Until today. Luke was silent for a moment, then said, I came west for the same reason. To leave the past behind. Their eyes met, two souls weathered by loss, finding in each other a reflection of what they'd tried to outrun. You're safe here, Luke said, voice steady. And for the first time, Clara believed it might be true. The next morning dawned cold, with a sharp wind sweeping down from the mountains. Luke rose before first light, stepping out onto the porch with his rifle resting against his shoulder. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowed against the glare of the rising sun. The world felt too still. Inside, Clara watched him from the window, her fingers wrapped tight around the edge of the curtain. She hadn't slept much. The comfort of the cabin had dulled the edge of her fear, but not erased it. The sound of hoofbeats in the night, imagined or real, echoed in her mind. Luke returned to the door, setting the rifle within easy reach. Is something wrong? Clara asked, her voice low. Maybe, Luke said. Maybe not. But it don't hurt to be ready. They ate in quiet, the crackle of the fire filling the space between words. After breakfast, Luke saddled the horse and rode out along the ridge, leaving Clara to tend the cabin. He didn't say where he was going, but the set of his jaw said enough. He was looking for signs. By midday he was back, his coat dusted with trail grit, face darker with worry. Riders passed through the valley this morning, he said. Didn't come this way, but they're close enough to matter. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Who would be looking for me this far out? Luke didn't answer right away. Men who think they own what ain't theirs. Clara folded her arms, hugging herself. What do? We keep our heads, stay sharp. And if they come, I won't let them take you. The promise in his voice was plain, no need for grand words or show. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant, faint sound of hooves. Clara turned toward the door, heart pounding. Luke reached for the rifle, eyes hard now, steady. It's all right, he said quietly. Let them come. And together they stood, waiting for whatever came out of the wide Wyoming land. The wind had shifted again by late afternoon, carrying dust and the smell of rain that wouldn't come. Luke stood at the porch, rifle cradled in his arms, eyes fixed on the trail where the ridge cut sharp against the sky. Clara stayed inside, but she watched him through the window, every part of her tense as a drawn bow. Then they appeared. 3 riders, their shapes wavering in the heat haze, but becoming clearer with every beat of their horses' hooves. The man at the front rode tall, coat flapping, hat pulled low, the kind of man used to getting his way just by showing up. His eyes found the cabin, found Luke, and he reined his horse to a halt just yards from the porch. Morning, the man called, though there was nothing friendly in his tone. Luke didn't lower the rifle. Afternoon. The man shifted in his saddle, glancing at the cabin, then back at Luke. Looking for a girl. Red hair. Said she ran off with some fella who thought he could hide her out here. She's no one's to claim, Luke said evenly. The man sneered. She's kin to my cousin. And kin don't get to wander off without cause. Inside, Clara's breath caught. She pressed her hand to the window as if she could will Luke safe through sheer will. Luke stepped down off the porch, boots silent in the dirt. He stood square, steady, the rifle held easy but sure. She don't belong to you, he said. And she don't want what you're offering. The man's face darkened, mouth twisting. You aiming to die for her? Luke's voice stayed low, steady as the wind. I'm aiming to see she's left in peace. You can ride out or you can see how far you get before I stop you. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the horses stilled as if the whole world was holding its breath. Then with a grunt, the man spat in the dust, turned his horse. Ain't worth the trouble, he muttered. His companions followed, and together they rode off, their silhouettes shrinking against the horizon. Luke waited until they were nothing but dust on the wind before lowering the rifle. Inside, Clara's tears came, quiet and grateful. The wind softened as evening fell, no longer sharp with tension, but carrying the cool promise of night. Luke leaned his rifle against the porch rail and stood for a long while, watching where the riders had disappeared, as if making certain they wouldn't return. Clara stepped outside, the cabin door creaking softly behind her. She came to stand beside him, the hem of her dress brushing against his boot. For a moment neither spoke. The land around them lay quiet, bathed in the gold and lavender of sunset, as if even the earth was weary of conflict. "You didn't have to do that," she said at last, voice hushed. Luke glanced at her, his expression softer now. "Yes, I did." She looked away toward the ridge. The weight she'd carried for so long, the fear, the running, the doubt, seemed to lift just a little on the breeze. "I've spent so long feeling like I had no place," Clara whispered. "Like I was always waiting to be taken or tossed aside." Luke reached out then, slow, so she could pull away if she wished. But she didn't. His hand settled over hers, rough palm warm against her fingers. "You've got a place now," he said. "If you want it." Clara's breath hitched. The words were simple, but they steadied her in a way nothing had in years. She turned to him fully, saw the truth in his eyes. No demand, no expectation. Just the offer of safety. Of belonging. "I do want it," she said, voice clear despite the tears that brimmed. The stars began to prick the sky, one by one, as they stood together on the porch, hands clasped, the cabin behind them no longer just shelter, but home. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, the night felt like a promise, not a threat. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt less like refuge and more like a beginning. Mornings brought the pale gold of dawn light spilling across the cabin floor, the smell of coffee brewing, the soft murmur of voices learning how to share space without fear. Luke patched the corral fence, showed Clara how to stack kindling so it would catch with the first spark. Clara mended a tear in his coat, baked bread that filled the cabin with warmth even before it was out of the oven. Each small task stitched them closer, quiet acts of trust that spoke louder than any promise made aloud. At night, they sat on the porch beneath a sky thick with stars. Some nights they talked in soft voices about what had been, about losses, about mistakes, about hopes they'd been too tired to name before. Other nights, they simply sat, hands clasped, letting the stillness say what words couldn't. Winter came early that year, laying frost along the window panes and painting the fields silver in the moonlight. But inside the cabin was warm. And when the first snow fell, Clara stood at the window and watched it drift down, soft and clean, covering the past in white. Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, the weight of him steady, the quiet of the room deep and sure. "We built this," she said, voice soft with wonder. "We did," Luke said. And as they stood together, watching the snow fall over the land that had given them a second chance, they understood. Sometimes the hardest journey leads not to a place but to a person. And sometimes, when the world forgets you, it's the quiet kindness of one soul that makes it home again.